You have memorably referred to post-war America as a consumer's republic, and in fact written a wonderful and erudite book on the topic. Tell us what you mean by consumer's republic and how it relates to the mass suburbanization that came through America after World War II.
My concept of consumer's republic is of my own invention, and it's a shorthand that I use to talk about a reorientation in the American economy and in American political culture towards an America that is built around mass consumption, and that involves material consumption, but also a new channel for delivering long-sought American goals of freedom and equality. So what I see happening is after a long period of a Great Depression during the 1930s and World War II, which finally brought the United States out of that depression, actually quite a crisis at the end of World War II about what would sustain that American recovery. Here we were building...
And my fellow economists were terrified during this time period. We couldn't possibly imagine how we were going to get through this.
Exactly.
Right?
And here, what are we going to do? We're not building planes. We're not going to be building tanks and armaments, though it should be said that the Cold War provided some of that answer. But basically, there was this embrace of the production of mass consumer goods. So we'll change factories that make planes into factories that make cars. We will make appliances where we're making armaments. And so the American society, the American economy gets restructured around mass consumption in the post-war period. And that really defines a lot of what it means to succeed for Americans. Now, part of that was to also make the largest consumer item a home, a private home.
And perhaps the second largest is the car.
Yes, exactly. And you needed a car to get to that home if the home was in the suburbs. And there were options that housing planners and developers had. We could have expanded our cities. We could have built more multi-family housing. That might actually have been a more strategic approach in that we would have been able to house more people. But instead, we went a different way. We developed large areas of single-family homes. What I think was really crucial about the way in which suburbia took shape was that this is a post-war suburbia, because we should just say that suburbanization is a long-standing process. There were suburbs in the 18th century. Boston had Brookline and Milton, which were flourishing in the 19th century, and they were elite suburbs. By the late 19th century, we had upper-middle-class suburbs, often built around trains. In the 20th century, there were probably two key moments when suburbia really took off. One, the 1920s, which was more of a middle-class suburbanization process. And then in this post-war period that I'm talking to you about now, we had what I call mass suburbanization. And that's where you were getting lots of homes built on small plots. But the key is that they were separate municipalities. And so people were no longer within that urban political unit. They were really owning a home within a separate entity. When you start segmenting and making these communities very distinctive, with their own tax bases that are going to pay for services like schools, and a wealthy suburb is going to be able to afford to spend more per pupil than a working class suburb where people are not in a position to pay as much, their homes aren't valued at the same level. You end up, despite the promise of the Consumers' Republic, which is that we are going to deliver a new kind of equality, you end up with new kinds of inequality in the metropolitan area that starts to surround a city. And so in some very disturbing ways, as the Consumers' Republic played out, it really fed these new kinds of inequalities.
It's probably worth emphasizing that during this period, America switches from being a nation predominantly of renters on the eve of World War II to being a nation predominantly of owners, almost at modern levels by 1960.
And then we should say how it is possible that so many people became homeowners. That wouldn't have happened before the war, and a major reason for that was the passage of the GI Bill during the war, which allowed veterans to get benefits to help pay for their schooling, but most importantly for this conversation, that they were able to get subsidies to buy homes, for down payments as well as for mortgages. And so an average working person or lower middle class person was now able to buy a home. The other thing and that all came from the federal government.
And it's worthwhile emphasizing that in the 20s we had mortgages, but they were 5 years. They were typically small. Now we're talking 15 or 30-year mortgages became the norm, and you just required a lot less money down on your house.
Yeah, and what made this so possible was the passing of the National Highway Act of 1956. All that clearing of farmland and forests to make space and possible those roadways was supported by the federal government. And so you could live at some distance from a city. You could still go to a factory downtown. You could still go to an office downtown, but live in this metropolitan area. So we created a metropolitan area that was very segmented socioeconomically, with downtown becoming in many cases, and the urban core by the 1960s, in some cases being very upper class still, but then very much poor people, and the vast middle class moving out into these separate metropolitan suburban communities.